Okay, just some basics to start with. Could you tell us in broad terms why you wanted to run for board?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I have really loved the union over the past 2.5 years. I got involved in the union for the first time when I went to the Asia Pacific Model United Nations Conference in New Zealand in 2013. So my first kind of broad union experience besides buying food on campus or O-Week was in New Zealand overseas, which was quite cool. And then from there, when you're away with people, you make really good friends. And I made really amazing friends, came back, wanted to stay involved with them, and the way that we were connected was through the union. And so that was really cool. And then because I knew a lot about union from that, I kept getting involved and doing a lot of stuff, meeting a lot of new people, and I was just like, I want to get more involved in this and be kind of as involved in this organisation as I can.
Cool. Do you want to speak to your brand at all?
The innovative brand?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I suppose I think there are innovative ways that the union can make a few more students feel the way that I do about the union, because the union is incredible at kind of engaging a specific type of student, but I think it can be a lot more innovative in the way that it recognises that students want different things from their student experience.
Cool. Are you tired of saying innovative yet?
No, actually.
That's good, because you have a few days left of it.
Yeah, I do.
Just yet. Okay, in the last SRC election, you were a very public campaigner for Amy, I think you mean Amy Knox.
Yeah, there's Amy Knox.
Yeah, conflated Labour leaders. Are you or have you ever been a member of the Labour Party?
No, I haven't.
Cool. How would you describe your political views?
Broadly left-wing, women-identifying, feminist.
Cool. You're being managed by SRC Vice President Daniel Burgess, and he was one of the key campaigners for your grassroots opposition in that election. Yeah. So you've campaigned for a Labour candidate despite not being a member, and now you're being backed by the other side. Is that reflective of a shift in your personal politics, or is it just a case of political pragmatism?
No, it's not a reflection of a shift. I didn't campaign for Amy because she was Labour. I campaigned for Amy because individually I thought she was an incredible candidate,
sure,
a good friend, and someone who I supported, and Daniel's situation with Kyle was the exact same, and so that's not him backing the opposition or me kind of moving toward the opposition. It's just friends recognising each other's candidacy.
Cool. And of the other candidates, who do you think your views most closely align with?
From what I've seen from the candidates at the moment, I feel quite closely aligned with Michael Rees and his accountability priorities for the union, and also with Lemise Hamuda, and because I really support her kind of prioritising inclusivity of everyone on campus.
Cool. Kind of an extension of that then, have you thought much of preferences, and at the moment who would you preference first, second and last?
To be honest, I haven't thought much of preferences. It's such a short campaign, it's quite scary, the 2 weeks. So, even though it's been 3 days, which feels like barely anything, preferences have to be decided on quite soon. I wouldn't rule anyone out of preferences at the moment, but my strategy for preferences will be trying to kind of use preferences to reflect the values that I have and reflect the candidates I want to see elected. Cool.
In the event that you were elected, who would you be voting for in the executive elections, particularly the president of the board?
I don't think that's something I can say at the moment. I mean, when no one has told me that they're running,
right.
If they do, or when it comes to the presidency, and the executive in general, I would need to see their vision, which is something that I can't see at the moment.
Okay.
And I haven't even been elected yet, so that's more the priority at the moment.
That's fair. A lot of this is quite forward-looking.
Yeah.
And which leads nicely into probably the most prescient question that we have on in the interview. A lot of students last year said that if they were to run for executive positions in the year that followed, they wouldn't seek the votes of Senate-appointed directors. Many of them since have. Is that something you would be interested in pursuing, or could you conclusively rule out now appealing for Senator Board appointed director votes?
I haven't thought about it much. I think that the strategy that I would use to get votes for executive elections would be the same one that I would use for student directors as well as Senate appointed directors, which is just performing to the best of my ability for the union and seeing where that takes me.
Cool. How do you think the balance of power falls at the moment within the union as an institution between student and non-student power brokers?
I think that, we've seen progress like with equity access schemes and things like that. So I think that there is quite a left-wing balance and understanding between both staff and the student board directors. And I think that the staff, for as far as I can tell, being still on the outside of the organisation, seem to respect the fact that these student board directors are kind of the top tier of the organisation and their job is to support and facilitate their plans.
So you think that the balance of power between staff and students on the board is equal?
No, I would say, as far as I can tell, the students have the ideas, the board of directors has the ideas, and with the access to the information they have, try and make those ideas as feasible as possible. And then the power in the staff is then kind of trying to use their professionalism and their kind of experience, because they are the professionals, whether it comes to the finances or the logistics. Like, the executive member for the operations is the person that you definitely need to consult with. So I think the balance of power with the staff lies in them being able to give their expertise.
And in particular, the Senate appointed directors, are you comfortable with the fact that they hold 2/13 of the deciding vote?
I would rather it was fully student controlled.
Sure, that's cool. More or less addresses the next question. Actually, I'm not going to take the answer for granted, so if you don't mind, you've mentioned that you will fight for a student-controlled union. Would you be in favour of removing Senate-appointed board directors, and if so, how would you go about achieving that?
Or at least the policy point in general.
The policy point of a fighting union in general?
No, of a student-controlled.
Oh, okay. So,
in general.
Good question. I haven't thought about the Senate-appointed directors much in detail, and so I wouldn't want to, give too much of an answer that I haven't thought out, just for the sake of feeling under pressure right now.
That's fine.
But in terms of how I would implement student control over the student union, one thing that I've thought about and that I'm really, really passionate about is the Club and Societies program. So as I mentioned to you guys, I got basically my kind of door to the union and to student life was the United Nations Society, and I absolutely love it. I love what it's done for me and what I think Club and Societies have done for a lot of other students, not only, giving them some fun experiences or taking them overseas, but giving them opportunities to grow professionally by being on the executive and by having long-term planning for their clubs. But I think that can be a bit stifled by the way that the Club and Societies committee works and by the way that the funding model of CNS works at the moment. So I'm happy to go through that if you guys wanted.
Yeah, I think just elaborate a little bit more on.
Cool. Okay, so for example, the Club and Societies funding model at the moment, you run an event, you get reimbursed for what you spend, which is excellent because obviously no students feel like they're under pressure to finance student life for anyone else. But what it does mean is, you can't long-term invest in like equity access for delegates to attend a conference, for example, on the basis of their, ability to perform well at that conference. It's instead about their ability to pay. And so we should give clubs a lot more autonomy over the way that they use the Club and Societies money that they're eligible for. And we can implement those changes, I think, through a direct election of the Club and Societies Committee, which at the moment is 10 to 11 students who get appointed by the union to that committee, and they oversee, applications for new clubs, appeals by clubs, things like that. We should have club executives directly electing those people is one way that I think we can improve student control.
To that end, there are rumours that the CNS committee may be scrapped in favour of a streamlined approval method that just goes straight to the board. What do you think is the role of the board in intervening, particularly for political reasons, in the formation of clubs and societies?
I think that the role of the board is intervening with any club and society that compromises the welfare of students, essentially. So, for example, I forget exactly what it's called, but you guys would probably be able to help me out with it. With
BroSoc?
Yeah, BroSoc, thank you. Yeah, the BroSoc Society. So I think that, you know, the premise of the society as it stood was definitely a violation of students' welfare on campus.
Cool. Did you want to go into some of those?
Yeah, right. Under what circumstances would you consider it appropriate to breach your duty to the board for the greater good or for student welfare?
I think that the circumstances that's appropriate in are circumstances where the board appears to be corrupt, and it appears, because I think that what we need to note there is that as a board director, you have duties to the board and you have, you know, like obligations, legal obligations and things, but you were elected because you have a duty to the student body. And so if you're committed to that duty, which is just as important and more ideological even than potentially the kind of bureaucratic obligation to the board, if you're going to completely fulfill that role, then any time that the union is corrupt or any time that union actions seem like they're compromising students on campus is a time that you can intervene or you can violate your obligation to the board, which is kind of paradoxical in the sense that you're not violating your duty as a board director to students.
So how do you see that aligning with the Tom Rowie scenario?
So I think that Tom made the right decision, and I would have voted against censoring him if that was me.
Okay, great. Do you have any, so you've already outlined how you want to have a fighting union. How do you plan on implementing a more diverse union and a more responsive union? What are your...
Cool, okay. So, with a responsive union, I think we need a union that gives students a lot more opportunities for feedback and a lot more opportunities for control over their student life. So it kind of is connected with student control as well. But firstly, one way that we can be responsive is recognizing that, you know, performance spaces are a really, really important aspect of student life. Not only for people that are involved in the performing arts, but also as a means for which, you know, students can view those performances and experience student life. So performance spaces is a way we can respond to one of the holes in, you know, encouraging people to enjoy their uni life. We can also do that by next time there's a development like the $7.5 million Courtyard Cafe, or there's also talk of a Wentworth redevelopment, asking students what they want in that space, and so responding to their needs that way, which I think will go really, really far in, you know, showing students that the union is listening to them. And if you're a student who really wanted a food outlet on campus specifically, and you see that that's in the new Wentworth building, you're going to go there and you're going to feel a lot more invested in the union, which is really, really cool. We can also be diverse by, a diverse union addresses being able to cater to a lot more students than we currently do. So I mentioned earlier that one of the kind of areas for improvement I think the board has is by not just catering to a specific model of student, like one that has a certain amount of contact hours or that lives a certain distance away from campus. So in terms of, we can go more lengths in what the board has been doing with equity access schemes for access. I think subsidising access for low socioeconomic students is a really, really great step by the union board, and we should continue to fight to make sure that access just gets cheaper and cheaper, you know, payment plans for access, things like that, to acknowledge the diversity in financial status of students. We can also acknowledge the diversity of the things that students want from their union. So I want to go to conferences with the United Nations Society. Someone else wants to go and have, you know, go and sit on the lawns and have a few drinks with their friends while they talk politics, whatever. A science student might want something completely different, an architecture student might want something completely different, or maybe it's not about their faculty, maybe students just want something different. So I think we should acknowledge a lot more academically, the diversity with our students, because the union is really, really fantastic at the social life that it encourages, but I don't know how much at the moment it recognises academics of students. So I think one way we can foster that a bit more and foster intellectual collaboration is, for example, like an ideas fair. So think of a science fair, but basically just with ideas, and it's a way that faculty and things can intersect. So we can acknowledge financial status, we can acknowledge academics, and we can also acknowledge, you know, that some students don't want to fully experience nightlife or like all the time, or some students live too far away from campus to go to that 7 p.m. event. So we can encourage clubs to run a few events during the day, like a few of their highlight events, and I acknowledge that a large part of uni life is nightlife, and you know, I'm not trying to stifle that at all, but just encouraging a few more events during the day is an example, and I'm not trying to go into the territory of making promises I can't keep, or of, you know, committing to something that might frustrate a club executive at the moment, but, you know, is a practical example in all those things.
So primarily academic and financial diversity.
And also access to club and societies as well.
Okay.
Sure. There are a lot of societies that run events during the day. I think the biggest obstacle is the fact, obviously, that most contact hours take place between the hours of 9 and 5.
Yeah.
That obstacle aside, do you mind if I sort of jump into
sure.
the tail end of that one?
Yeah, sure.
You've spoken about the importance of access and the equity programs. I think it's undeniable that removing the cost of an access card is help of some kind. But what's the sustained benefit for a lower SES student, particularly one who has to like commute a great distance every day? Like, is that removing enough of an obstacle to get them as involved in the union, say, as much as you or I or Sam?
Yeah, okay. So removing access is a large way that we can do that, but if they are a low SES student, they are potentially working more hours than we are. They're potentially coming into campus less for the non-compulsory contact hours that they have. So we can engage them by, and this isn't something that I've fully thought about yet, you know, with student control, we'd come up with some kind of system where we can consult with low SES students who are willing to talk to them about what ideas they have. But an idea that pops into my head at the moment is, even with that ideas fair, getting that to happen from home, getting students to be able to contribute from home, like allowing students to participate a bit more maybe off campus is an idea that we could do for that.
Sure.
But it's not something I've thought about fully.
That's fine. Feel free to jump back in.
Yeah, right. Would you take a position on the board if you were elected through affirmative action? If so, why or why not?
I would take the position. It wouldn't be ideal because, you know, I wouldn't want to feel like I was spending the term proving myself, but I would definitely take the position because I don't think I would have put myself up for running for board if I didn't think that I was capable of doing the job. And I'm incredibly, incredibly passionate about the union, and I think that the ideas that I have and are really, really worthwhile, and so I would spend a lot of time on board, you know, trying to implement those and trying to make my position worthwhile, and I would take the position.
What do you think have been the greatest policy achievements and also failures of the current board?
So the greatest policy achievements, I would say, have been equity access. I would say that the transparency review has also been really, really great. I went to both forums when Tara and Bibi were kind of formulating their policy, and those forums, especially the first one, had about 60 students there, and it was a really, really well run forum, and people were contributing like crazy, and it was really fantastic. And I think that that is an example of how, when policy is formed collaboratively and when student control doesn't end with student board directors, and when it's lended widely to the student body, you do have students who are engaged and informed and sensible. And so I think that the transparency review is probably my favourite, not only because of the end result, but because of the process transparent process that went through to get there. In terms of policy failures, I think I haven't fully, thought about that either. I think the easiest way, the most kind of process you would use for that is to look at what policies directors run on and see which haven't happened. And I would say that that's not even necessarily a failure, because maybe they recognise that they just weren't feasible or weren't realistic or weren't necessary. But maybe they were. I'm not in the best position to say. I don't have access to the information at the moment.
There have been a couple of candidates who have come through and talked about. I don't want to tread too far on your toes. I'll skirt the matters.
You can take them.
No, that's cool. I think I've got it. That have floated with the idea of, if not a more direct relationship between the union and the SRC, things within the union that look more at this sort of collectivised way that certain groups within the SRC operate. There isn't really a precedent for a relationship between the SRC and the USU, despite the fact that I think there is an overlap in the aims. Both pursue, they're both there ostensibly in the interest of student welfare. Which organisation do you think does more for student welfare on campus?
I think they're very different. I mean, if you're talking, it depends what you mean by student welfare, and I think to an extent that means something different to every student. Some students might derive welfare more strongly from knowing they have psychological support at the SRC, but they might also find a lot of strength in having, recreational outlets, which I think the union provides. So I don't know if I can speak on behalf of all students and say that one does better for anyone.
That's fair. And we sort of addressed the balance of power question already. So do you want to go into the ethics and activism?
Yeah, definitely. What do you see the role of the board having in an activist sort of capacity? Do you think the board and your role as a board director can sort of contribute to activism on campus and social movements?
Yeah, I definitely do. So I think the board should definitely be activist, and I think that it has been in the way over the last 2 years, the transparency review, the equity access scheme, and not voting to censor Tom. I think all of those were examples of activism and sent a really strong message about what the union stands for, and I think they've done that incredibly well. And I think that we can continue to do that. So protests against fee deregulation, that the SRC or NUS organisers, the union should definitely get involved with those. I don't know if the union needs to, I think that, so in terms of things like campaigns that the SRC is running, I don't think the union needs to come up with their own. The overlap is redundant. I think they can definitely sponsor and support the SRC collectives. But I think if you deem inclusivity as activism, if you consider inclusivity as activism, then I think, for example, the Mises policies for a Muslim women's safe space is incredible, and the union definitely has room in areas like that.
Do you think the CEO and the Senate appointed directors see the board as a service provider or as an activist space?
I'm not sure. I don't know them. I don't know the CEO. I don't know Andrew. I don't know Simone. I don't know Emma. So I really couldn't tell you. But I think that I like to think that how they see the board is dictated by who the board is made up of.
Okay. Do you think it is appropriate to discuss issues like CEO remuneration in camera?
Yes, I do.
And to clarify, in camera being the opposite of what it sounds like.
Oh, then no, I don't.
Sorry. Yeah.
Look,
No, I
not the
really
first,
should know
won't be
that,
the
but
last. It's so
okay.
fine. So just to clarify.
Thank you, that could have gone messy.
That's
Thank
so
you for the
fine.
clarification.
I don't think there are many people, very few people have come through and said that they would
I'll
support
change
the
that too, there you
discussions
go.
in camera. You've got broad policies of transparency, and you've talked about how much you've done so far. Just to clarify, Tiff is in fact in favour of CEO remuneration being discussed openly, not in camera, reported as the rest of the meetings are.
Similarly, would you support the full divulgence of remuneration, financials and expenses of the board directors?
Yes, I think it should be published on the website, board expenditure.
Yeah, including cab charges,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, I think that holding board members accountable and recognising that, you know, these are people also that are probably happy to do that because they do care about the union a lot. Like, I don't think anyone would put themselves through this process unless they really, really cared about the union. And I think a lot of the candidates at the moment are quite left-wing and progressive and really wouldn't have anything against doing that either. So I don't think that's a massive challenge either. I think that's something that the previous board has done really well in terms of setting a really progressive precedent continually over the past 2 years.
Do you think the board went far enough in censoring Magyar and Carrigan over their cab charges?
I'm actually not sure exactly what I know they got censored, but I'm not sure exactly what the punishment or the consequences were. So if you guys could clarify those.
I'm actually not 100% on censure. As I understand, it's like a formal reprimand.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is a
Okay.
formal reprimand. It's sort of, I don't understand.
I think they talked about, I know there was discussion of covering the money themselves. I don't know whether or not that ended up happening. But I think censure is sort of the official recognition of wrongdoing by the board.
Okay, so I think that first strike, potentially that was enough for the first strike, but I think that there was a consequence, which, you know, is appropriate, but I don't think that there was then an action. So one of, you know, the reason that you're asking me about whether board expenditure should be published online is because it's not. And you would think that potentially after an incident like that, that could be an action straight away.
Because we were also only given their expenditures for the month of January.
Yeah.
Following
That I think it's quite nice to look at that as a reaction rather than necessary more punishment. That's cool and practical. You sort of covered that. Oh yeah, this is always a fun one. If you had to cut $1 million from the union's budget, where would you make the cuts and why?
Ooh. I'll just take a minute to think of
That's
one.
cool. You're obliged to give an answer that's hard to phrase well.
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure of the makeup of the entire budget.
It's not entirely easy given that there's a 12-month delay between what's being done and being published.
Exactly. I suppose then the best answer that I could give is, you know, with my very, very limited information at the moment, is trying to equally cut across the board, across the union, because at the moment I'm not sure which departments service students the best. Obviously, the makeup of how we cut that $1 million should be proportional to which serve students best, or at least which have the capacity to serve students best.
That's excruciatingly diplomatic. But fair.
I think we sort of only have one question left, really. We've covered everything else. Are you willing to admit you may not achieve all of your policies?
Yeah, I am. And I don't think that that is a flaw. I think that if you don't achieve all of your policies, it's because, like, I know that I can speak for myself, that if I get elected, I'll be incredibly grateful that I did, and I will recognise the privilege of the position that I'm in, because it's an organisation that I really, really care about, and I will completely recognise that, so I will work incredibly hard. So if the policies don't get implemented, it will be because there is a reason that they shouldn't be, or that there's a reason that it wouldn't have been the best that they did. And whether that be through student consultation, hopefully it is, then that's the way it is.